John Street, and you're watching PAX 8 Live.
We want to help you take your MSP business to the next level.
We have just expanded the amount of resources that you as partners have through PAX 8.
Real security is about how you manage the losses, how you take the punches, how well you detect, how well you respond.
This is where we'll be bringing you content that you want to see every week to help you grow your business.
And I think the real winners here are the managed service providers.
Who is this?
Chief Cuteness Officer.
My advice is know what you're selling and know whether it's making you money.
I ended up living in Korea for 4 years.
I was wondering when we were going to talk about the elephant in the room.
But thanks, Dad.
Let's talk about risk assessment. So there's all kinds of ways to respond to risk.
Man, it's great to see you, Dom.
If you're really interested in just the nerdy bits of home security, definitely check out those resources. That was a huge thunder.
Are you guys excited? Are you ready to start Beyond?
I think folks are really, really excited about what they can do with their customers and how they can help grow their business.
It's a massive opportunity for all of you.
Cheers to the channel community.
Welcome to the game, PAX 8 show where our experts discuss all things cybersecurity. I'm Cam Goldman, filling in for Dom Kirby. I'm joined with our co-host, Matt Lee. We got a great show for you today. Our special guest is Bob Miller. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, throw some comments in the chat, turn on alert notifications. And now, Matt, let's take us to the news.
Dude, you've got like that baller radio voice. Like, I got to be honest, I think Dom may be in trouble here. I don't know about y'all in the audience, but comment. Like, no, you don't think? You don't want to start any tension with me and Dom?
Show, we're creating like radio wars. We don't need to be stepping on that.
That's my goal, bro. That's my goal. No, you're right. But yeah, it's great having you here. Dom couldn't make it, and Cam is filling in for us, which is awesome. And we've got just an amazing guest. It's a personal friend of mine, a colleague, somebody I'd consider a peer, and also somebody that's doing some really cool stuff to raise the tide in his own right with Bob Miller. And so please stick around until he gets here and throw him all the peppered comments you can, and we will be glad to put him up. To add to that, if you are on the PAX 8 YouTube, which is the PAX 8 Cloud YouTube, your comments can actually come on the show. So if you're watching this on LinkedIn, or if you're watching this on my YouTube, or if you're watching this on any other source, join us over here on PAX 8's YouTube, PAX 8 Cloud, and if you want to put your comments in, we'll be glad to interact with them. So let's go ahead and jump into the news, Cam, and I'm going to be peppering you with questions. You're a security guy too, so I'd love to hear your opinion on some of these. All right. I don't want to miss the fact that we just covered Mandiant going through the same exact thing. I mean, almost literally the same thing. You have Mandiant compromised. You have pretty much instantaneous Bitcoin type offers and ads and things. And here we find it with the Security and Exchange Commission, which is just a little delicious, if I'm honest, right? The SEC's X account was compromised on Tuesday, which is the latest high-profile account on social media to be taken over. They confirmed their account was compromised after a tweet was sending out claiming the commission granted approval for Bitcoin exchange-traded funds, or ETFs, to be listed on the national security exchanges. The SEC Gov Twitter account was compromised, and an unauthorized tweet was posted. The SEC has not approved the listing and the trading of spot Bitcoin products, right? So it's interesting because the SEC didn't really kind of comment on it much, but in recent months, we're growing concerns about X's security capabilities, but I don't know if I point it to that direction, although maybe we can get into it. We don't have to keep this up. Cam, let's chat about this a little bit, right? So I guess the first premise is we've had a string of compromises that turn into Bitcoin scam, Bitcoin-esque type rapid make money off of this operation. Let's talk about that first. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and it's not just Bitcoin, right? Like there was, I think, someone got hacked and the price of insulin was announced to be
Sure.
free, so that slaughtered some stock prices. There was some fake news out there that the Pentagon had been attacked, so a little bit heat on X for allowing this, but I think if they're also gonna start being that open to have this kind of impact, then people might need to move their communication strategy elsewhere, right? If you can't
Yeah.
rely on X.
Well, and let's take it. Let's just say we have to make this decision of, is this a failure on the platform, or is this a failure on the humans and the management of the platform? And I think that's what's yet to be seen here, right? In my opinion, I think when you think about it, there's been discussion of, is it X's token management problem? Is it something they're doing that causes these vulnerabilities and someone's taking it over? Or is this Matt getting fished out of my account and the compromise is taking over? Because those have very distinct challenges. But even as I say that, you have an interesting part that comes out of it, because LinkedIn does a really good job of finding token theft. Ask me how I know. Right? And so says a guy that's locked himself out of his LinkedIn and had to mail them his driver's license picture in an envelope. But yeah, ultimately, yes, you can find yourself where there are different degrees of vendor response there. So I think that's the part of, if it is platform centric, right? If there are challenges there to whether I can't use SSO, or there's not restrictive capabilities around the token, or other things that come into play. But the first part of it is this financial market manipulation part, right? And I think what people fail to understand, and I do a talk about this, is you think there's some hacker in a hoodie that's just out there, I'm not going to go upstairs and pee, and I'm going to eat just ho-hos in my basement, and there's no, this is an ecosystem, a financial ecosystem. And so when you think about it, financial market manipulation is just another tool in the trade of that same extensibility of trying to make profit. How do you make profit? The ways, right? What are the ways? It can be manipulating social markets. It can be manipulating financial markets vis-a-vis social interpretation, right? Those kind of things. So I think that's actually what we're seeing play out here, is just this better understanding of the manipulation of large voice and vocal platforms. And I think my real advice would be, rather than the specter of some platform failing at it or other things, when you have a platform that's failing at it, to your point, if you can assess that my tools aren't there to make me successful here, make that decision and move to a different platform. But if the tools are there and you're not using them, make better decisions on how you protect something that's that sensitive and that valuable. So I'd make both of those statements at once anyways. So got me off on a tangent.
I don't argue with that. I do think, again, we're seeing this become a trend, right? It's definitely something that folks recognize that they can manipulate, they can make a lot of money doing it. So someone has to step in, or someone has to step out. Right. And that's going to be the public sphere, then step out and choose to remove that risk vector.
Yeah. It's all about risk, isn't it, Cam? Like 100%. Nailed it. Okay, let's go on to the next one we have here in our queue, which is actually a free decryptor. I wanted to bring some good news, right? Instead of all this Johnny bad news stuff that we've been seeing. From a good news perspective, I don't know if we can roll that, but we have a free decryptor. There it is. A free decryptor for the Tortilla variant of Babook ransomware has been released, which, by the way, is fun side topic. The way these get assigned and the groups that come up with them, I imagine I have a very good time creating the names for them, right? Because these are all names we've tracked someone.
Yeah, what a great place to be, marketing job to have. But it does raise the question: are we talking corn or flour, right? So that's the most important. No, but Matt,
nice,
educate me here. Educate me, because a decryptor comes out. In my mind, I roll my eyes. So what? They just change a little bit of code, move on to the next ransom variant that can't be decrypted.
You're not wrong.
If you are encrypted, what are you doing decrypting that device anyway? And I would say that thing's got to get reformatted. Like, you got to go back to BIOS. So
no. I'll speak from a practitioner.
What are we doing here?
There. So so that's a great question. Guess what? I know that this is going to shock the audience. We don't even have to really dig into this. Just know that those are out there. You can get them. They're available. But this is going to shock you, Cam, I swear. Everybody doesn't have good cyber hygiene and good resilience capabilities. No. I know, bro. I know. I'm sorry.
You blow my mind.
I'm sorry. I don't. If I ruined it for you, like Santa Claus isn't real, that's on me. I'm sorry. Yeah, but
I do need those family
is
pictures.
What happens? What happens though is, think about the endpoints that get ransomed. Think about how many end devices where maybe a good backup to the server wasn't set up, or good structure of offsiting wasn't there, sensitive data where it shouldn't be, backup strategies not executed well, failed backups, things where the negotiation didn't happen from a monetary perspective to be able to afford the key. And so you have things. I myself have waited for a decryptor many, many moons ago, and when it came out, went back and looked at a former data set to see if there were other things recoverable that weren't. We knew we had loss, right? We knew where that loss was. And so I don't want to speak from an ivory tower here on that and say that you never would. But there's always, I will say always, there's a use case when some of those failures I've just described exist. And it's really nice when you see those decryptors, because it does offer an option. And specifically in a lot of these variants, you usually see this in those variants that attack the end consumer, where you have mom and pop sitting there with a bricked computer. And to your exact point, Cam, my picture's back. That's where a lot of these ransomware also come into play. And so don't just forget about the business side. Think that end consumer side that also has fell victim to these types of methodologies, right? Whether it be these specific ones or not. I didn't dig into the TTPs and who they attack. But the point is, hope that helps give at least an advice. And that's a great question. So
yeah, that helps.
Very cool. Very cool. So there's a new one out there. And then this last one I want to dig into, and I kind of want your opinion and just kind of the shock value opinion of this a little bit too, Cam. Let's bring up this article. We'll go through it, and then we'll talk about some corollaries. So Loan Depot takes systems offline following ransomware attack. This came out yesterday. Mortgage and non-mortgage lending firm, basically just lending firm, wouldn't that have been maybe appropriate? Anyways, I digress. Has fallen victim to a ransomware attack that has resulted in system disruptions. And their quote says, the company has determined that the unauthorized third-party activity included access to certain company systems and with the encryption data. And so they filed their Form 8K, which is the newly mandated requirement of speaking about these material breaches, right? And material gets into that conversation, or material incidents, I apologize. The Irvine, California-based non-bank holding company, the whole words section here, said it took immediate steps to contain the incident, which is good. The company shut down certain systems and continues to implement measures to secure its business operations and bring systems back online and respond to the incident, which is so good because this leads right into what we're going to talk about. The SEC filing, however, does not provide details on whether any personal information may have been compromised. So we don't know that this extends down to their, 16 million or 14.7 million humans or whatever it is. Loan Depot is the second mortgage firm, and I want to bring this up here in a bit, in the U.S. to fall victim to a cyber attack over the past 2 months. And actually, it's like the fourth in the financial industry that have played out. In late December, Loan Care, which provides servicing, was Fidelity National Financial. I brought up a few others that we're going to show here in a minute. And they said, we're only 3 weeks into the new SEC mandate for the 8K mandate that they spoke of. And here we have the first publicly traded company disclose a cyber incident, Rico.ai co-founder said back in that one. So anyways, we can stop here. But the point I want to bring up, Cam, is you now have compromisation that with the Fidelity incident, if I remember, took out the ability to close loans. Like you same thing with First American. Now you have this other mortgage lender down. And so you have more and more of these attacks on this sector. What are your initial thoughts on that? We'll just open there.
Well, thinking about, what Dom and yourself were talking about last week and having the SAC requirement out here, first thought is great. We're getting the notifications out there fast. We're getting ahead of it. We're learning what these companies are doing to minimize
great call out. In 30
impact.
days, we've gotten 3 reports. Great call. Yeah.
So I think that's great. Clearly, these lenders, these financial institutions, very juicy, data that they can be getting out. So from the consumer side of it, if I'm going to go looking for a mortgage lender, how do I ensure that, some of this information, I already know, right? Like my information's out there. If you want to find the handles that I use, if you want to find my email address, there's plenty of information out there, but my social security number, right? Like
driver's license pictures front and back. Yeah.
Very, very juicy information. So protecting that information at that point as a consumer, you're handing all of this over. What can I do when I enter into a situation where I'm saying I have to take out a loan, but how are you as a company protecting my data? Like what are the controls in place for me as a consumer? How do I get educated about that? How do I make a decision on the back of that education?
Dude, 100%. And that's where it is. It's a to pay no attention to the man behind the mirror effect today. In fact, some of the same mortgage origination software that's out there is the same stuff almost unchanged for the last 28 years or 30 years, right? And you have all of these challenges, some of the stuff that Sean Fox was talking about in the financial industry around closing agents and title agents and all of that side of it playing in with First American Financial Corp and First American Title as a part of that extensibility. And so all of those things is also part of the whole mantra from the National Cybersecurity Strategy, right? If you look at Pillar 3, I think it's 3.3 or 3.2, that speaks towards holding the stewards of our data accountable, right? I just want that to sink in. We're saying it is not often that the consumer themselves are the one that are protecting themselves. It's often that when I am a large company and I build a car, it must be of X quality, and I must have X ability to repeat that quality within this much tolerance and margins. And if something goes wrong, I must fix that, and I must be liable for that. We're in that space. But with software and with where we sit today and most of these things, and even with lending companies and people holding our data, none of that is true, right? None of that is true. And I think to your point, I don't want to put blame on them. I'm not trying to victim bash, but I will say we collectively around the world have not addressed the situation of stewards of our data, shared responsibility, and in a lot of ways repeating history of the past that we've all seen. The people at the very bottom are the victims of most of that output, not the companies themselves, right? The fines are meaningless. The impact of business, what are you going to do? Go to another lender? I mean, yes, there's a bunch of them, but they all roll up to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or some of these other aspects too. So, oh, okay. Got me triggered a little bit, Cam. Man, this is a good little partnership today. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, let's keep
one of the other things that was said in there that I want to point out was with this specific one, we took down our systems in response to a ransomware event. And then they used the term contain. And they also used the term incident response. And this all comes to play into what we're actually going to be talking about today with Bob Miller of when we start thinking through what are the stages of incident response? Do you have an incident response plan? Are you managing things when they come in, and are you ready and prepared to deal with it? And could you even report something in 4 hours or 4 days, depending on the different methodologies you've been asked for, with any meaningful data? And so we'll get into that, and we'll have some conversations about how do you and your team get ready for that with Bob. So let's go ahead and roll off. We're going to listen to the brilliant words of Robin Harris and let them sink in about personal data audits, and then we will move back and have our guest in. So Cam, thanks for doing the news with me. This was fun.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Well, we're into a new year and all kinds of wonderful things are ahead of us. And here's one thing I would invite you to take on, and I'm sorry it's not going to be fun. I would like to invite you to do a personal data audit. I notice a lot of companies, they will let you close your accounts, your online accounts, but your data is still sitting there. And they don't make it easy for you to get it deleted. They don't let you say, delete my account. They say, close my account, cancel my account. Your data's still in there. If you log back in, you'll see it's still got your credit card connected to it. It still has your address and name and phone number. So if that resource got hacked 10 years down the line, and you still have that same phone number and address or whatever, still have the same social security number, you've left your data in a vulnerable state. So what I'm going to invite you to do, and I'm going to have to do it myself, is if you're not using the account anymore and they don't allow you to just delete it yourself, send the email. Remove my data, delete my account. You don't want to leave your data all over the web. I pay for an identity theft service because they will monitor if your stuff is showing up. And what I saw was something showed up for an account that I hadn't used in 10 years, but I still have the same address. You know, I still have a lot of the same information. So if somebody got hold of that, they would be able to do some social engineering and phishing emails and that type of a thing. So you want to go back and just close those accounts and have them remove the data and delete the account. And keep a register. I know this is not convenient. If you have a password manager, that's a good place for it. But it's not convenient to keep up with all of the things you've subscribed to. But I would recommend anytime you're putting your email, especially if you're putting email, address, phone number, and especially if you're attaching like your PayPal account or credit card, you want to go back and remove that data. And here's something Apple did that I think is brilliant. And it's a paid service, but it's worth it. If you pay for extra space, they have something called Hide My Email. So for every site you assign to, you can have a unique email address that doesn't expose your real email. And what happens is if you see a hack or something come through, or if something phishing and is coming to that email, then you know that service was breached. They don't always, they're supposed to notify you, but they don't always notify you. So what this allows you to do is you can turn off those aliases so that they're no longer usable. So even when people have those emails, they won't be able to do anything with them because they're no longer active. So that's one way. And another way is to separate your legitimate email that you use with your bank and your credit cards and things like that, and create alias emails that you use for everything else. You do not need to be subscribing to all those email lists and all of that kind of stuff with your legitimate email. Use an alias. That's going to protect you. That's going to protect you. You want to really begin to treat your email address as if it's an asset. Your email address is an asset. And you don't want the wrong people getting hold of your email address or your cell phone number. So do your audit for your personal data and have a very, very exciting new year and a very safe new year.
Timely information, it would seem, especially vis-a-vis the conversation of actually being able to identify when a particular company has been compromised. And I'll go tell a little story on that myself real quick. So I actually, when I was a much younger man and it was all about mail, I would actually put in, when I was registering for a Best Buy account or registering for whatever, on the second address line, I would put Best Buy sold my information. So that way, when it showed up in some mailing somewhere else, I knew the second address line wouldn't get scrubbed, and I would find out who it was that was being not good with the way they were managing their marketing lists. But anyways, great call out.
I was a big none at AOL.com. That's if you ever needed my email address, none at AOL.com.
None at AOL.com.
I don't know who owned it, but they were getting a lot of spam.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Okay.
Sorry.
Cam, we're going to bring in a really awesome guest, and we're going to talk about incident response and in general tabletop exercises. But before we do, tell me what are your thoughts, around this topic in general, Cam?
I know it's important. I know, we're coaching MSPs towards, working these through internally. It's great to do it with your customers as well. But I'm going to be learning a lot today. I'm going to be listening. I'm going to be asking some dumb questions. Matt, tell me what is a tabletop exercise?
All right. I will guarantee everybody in the audience, just listen to me. I want you to really listen. I promise you, every person listening and watching this show right now has been through a tabletop exercise. Promise. A tabletop exercise is something that's meant to walk you through something, to help you simulate it so that you can see what doesn't work, what does work, understand what you might be doing and practicing. And what is yours? Have you ever, Cam, been to maybe middle school? And during middle school, did you ever do a fire drill?
Sure did.
Okay. Well, you practiced getting out of that building effectively. They checked as the teachers walked out whether the doors were actually unlocked and able to be opened. They checked to make sure we got to the parking lot and we could do a count. All of those things were being simulated as if a fire was going off when there was no fire. A tabletop exercise simply walks people through in a simulative fashion, whether it be emotional, operational, multiple different places, to take you through a guided exercise for some effect around being better at incident response in this specificity. So let's bring on the man, the myth, the legend himself, Bob Miller. Let's get him in here and we'll talk about it. Hey, Bob.
Thanks for joining, Bob.
Hey, man. Hey, guys. Matt, Cam, great to see you guys. And by the way, hello to the entire army of people behind the camera that actually make this go, because I got to look at that. And it ain't just the people on the screen. There's a bunch. Yeah, there's a few.
This production value, it doesn't come without them. So. Yeah,
they're fantastic. Exactly. So, Bob, I got to ask you though, man. I think you're faking me out with some picture and a green screen, but that looks like real guitars behind you, brother. What's your favorite
Oh,
one?
yeah.
Are those real?
Not
And
the
what's your
first-
favorite one?
Yeah, okay. So I get pinged all the time about having those artificial backgrounds, but you can't really actually do this to an artificial background. Or
It's a true story.
In this case,
it's a true story.
You can't like pick one up and say, "Hey, this was Steve Miller's guitar, and that belongs to Bob Miller." And so yeah. So
that's your
no,
cousin.
Yeah, I wish. It'd be a lot easier to get MP3s out of the process, but no, he's not my cousin at all.
Signed
I
his
do
booty
love his
on a
music.
big old
That's
jet
awesome.
airliner.
I can tell you this: an artificial background would be a lot cheaper than what's up on that wall.
It's a true story, and that's your studio. You converted a whole room for you and your kids to play music together, if I remember correct.
Yeah.
That's
All my sons are. Yeah, they're all musicians. They play multiple instruments. So yeah, it's a community space.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, listen, we've already got the comments lighting up about Sweet Child of Mine, so we're not going to jump into that right now. But I think the point is, Bob, what do you do? Tell everybody out here who you are. What do you do? Make an introduction, and then we'll get right into the meat of the tabletop conversation.
Yeah. My name is Bob Miller, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of MSSP in Louisiana called Global Data Systems. We're a service provider. We provide technology services. We're kind of a full stack provider. Everything. We do a lot of multi-mode communications as well as all of the standard infrastructure as a service and managed services kind of a product suite. So that's what we do. About a 30-year-old company. Yeah. I've been with the organization about 5 years. So,
yeah. And you and I first met, and we'll kind of go through it. You and I first met because of a game that you played and got to experience some of my pain as a result, right? And we're going to walk the audience through this one just a little bit. But, myself and Ethan Tancredi actually put together a tabletop exercise. Yep, there you go. There's me and Bob and Ethan when we were kind of planning this thing out. And anyways, we put together... It was before the exercise, for sure.
Yeah, well before the exercise.
Sure. Nobody's crying yet. But Ethan and I, a year or two before this picture, actually had made a game that simulated some of the elements of what I went through when I was at an MSP and we bought a company called Voldemort, right? And that company ended up costing us roughly $3 million or so in economic impact between insurance loss and what we could have bought and all of those aspects of it, right? And so that was where it became. And so I decided I want to put together a way to walk people through this. And this gets into what are tabletops in general, Bob? Like what would you define if you were trying to tell somebody what kind of tabletop exercises you might need to do as an MSP? What would you give advice of? Let's start with that. What are the types of tabletops you could think of?
Well, I mean, as a managed service provider, there's at least two big types, right? Ones you do with customers and ones you do with yourself. But out of those two groups,
sure.
If you're an MSP and you're talking about internally the types that we do that you need to do as a managed service provider, you really need to exercise your plan for when you experience some type of event that you can't explain and it rises to the level of requiring investigation and determination about what it is and the extensiveness of it. So that's the real world part of it. But then this incident response tabletop walkthrough is all about, okay, well, here's the plan we would follow to actually execute on figuring out what's going on. And I don't think most people realize, it's one of those things where, well, I should be able to do that. We should be able to figure that out without having, a written plan or proxy. And that seems pretty straightforward. But I would say that's because they've never actually been through one of these, as you will explain. And as we go further, we'll explain and show them the ramifications of it. But really, it is being sure to drill these steps in your mind so that they are a reflex, because time is important and these things are going on.
Just like getting those kids out of the burning building, right? Or in an emergency training. It's the same exact correlation.
Exactly.
Like
in my mind,
of any recovery, right? Like the steps, right? If you're not,
yes,
if you're going from 1 to 3 to 2, you're out of order.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's a great call out. And it leads us into this conversation, like the checklist manifesto, right? Or this understanding of how effective checklists are. And I'll do a really quick talk. There was a TEDx talk or so that one was talking about a Birmingham hospital. In this hospital, they wanted to do an experiment to see how much having a checklist for a surgeon would impact surgical, post-surgical death and post-surgical morbidity and mortality, right? Those aspects of it. And what was interesting is, the surgeons resisted. They're like, I'm a surgeon. I do what I do. I'm great at my job. And that comes from a little bit of the ego of being a doctor and going through that world. And we can get into the long form of that, but I don't want to waste time on IR. But ultimately, when they did that checklist and said, did I get all the sponges out? Did I leave the scalpels that I needed to leave on the table, not in the body, right? Did I cut the right leg off? Those kind of things. Did I give a post-surgical dose of antibiotics? Those kind of things. They had a 40% reduction in morbidity and mortality. Right? That just goes to show you the checklist aspect of this, and also testing it, making sure it works, and validating it and updating it over time is what makes that difference, right, in my mind. And in my mind, a tabletop is that. And in this case, there's several classes of tabletops. You have things that are meant to be educative and influence hearts and minds. And that's what this one is going to be one of. And you have tabletops that are meant to test operations and tactics, right? Are my tactics accurate to meet this strategy for this tabletop, or for this IR, or for this process, or for this failover, HA, DR, whatever it may be? Disaster recovery, high availability. Just catching my man on the acronyms, but ultimately, you're starting to see that there's operational, all kinds of different tabletops. So this isn't going to be what we said. We did you a little bit of hook bait. We won't be authoritative. We will, however, talk about one that you can do that's immediate, that doesn't take technical requirements. And Bob kind of took what we made and did that. So let's bring that slide deck back up, and I'm going to walk you through a hearts and minds type one that was built off of some failure that I went through, and I'm going to do my best not to tear up today. I think I will be successful. I'm good. So we called this Are You Ready for Your Worst Day? The name of the game was the MSP's Worst Day. Let's go to the next slide. And we came out and said to a group of MSPs. Now we have 5 people to a table in a room, right? And Bob, we're going to get to what you did in a minute. But in our first one with Ethan and I at Huntress, and myself did it separately with PAX 8. But we got 5 people on a table, and we had groups of teams competing against each other. And at that table, we tell them your annual revenue is about $3 million. You have 28 or so clients. You employ 15 awesome people, 10 techs, 1 service manager, 1 lead technician, right? Broke down to a pretty much real MSP. And so we then decided that we were going to move forward, and we've educated what they are and the size. That math kind of worked out. Me and Ethan sat down and figured out how do we want to play the game, but also broke it down into real decisions to be made. And you'll see what I mean in a second. So let's go ahead and move forward. Yeah, so backups are good, right? You're lucky to have, and I'm setting people's expectations. We're just teaching them where they are from that state. You have a sheet with clients and server workstation counts on them. You're lucky enough. And I'd stop right here and go, how many of you actually have a printed financial statement so you can make decisions on that revenue? And I'll just leave that as a nugget for later. And then second, you have a sheet with clients and server and workstation counts on them. How many of you have out-of-band methods, ways that you as an MSP listening to this could actually look at how many clients I have, how many machines there are roughly, get some size understandings of what it might take to work through restorations, those type of things, right? So next slide.
You're already making me nervous.
And then
seem to be successful. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, seem to be successful is Johnny foreshadowing, Cam. You honed in on it. That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So owner, CEO, service manager, lead tech, right? You go through the roles, and what we're really getting in is that you have to pick a role, and you're only going to be able to do certain functions as each role. So let's go on next. And then we tell people, right, this is actually Bob's slide, so I'm going to let you speak towards it as you used it. And maybe this is a good time to pause and talk about this, Bob. What did you do with this game that we're setting everybody up for? Tell me how you made this different.
Yeah, I mean, because the game that I experienced, like you described, right, was a bunch of MSPs in a room. We were all at separate tables, and we were playing as teams, which was great. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to really try and tie this more emotionally, because like you said, this is a hearts and minds exercise. And I would argue that you should be doing hearts and minds exercises before you even do actual IR tabletops, because I think in the end, people understand why you're doing the real IR walkthroughs once
starts
the hearts
with why.
and minds are
Thank you,
focused.
Simon Sinek.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's so
100%.
anyway, this was a hearts and minds exercise. So I took, the original exercise had a lot of generic company names and things like that, and I took those off and I put our actual company names. And I also added a column, as we'll talk about a little bit later, but I added a column that had how many years of relationship we had with those customers. So I made it, which were all accurate, and all of our people as part of our MSP knew these things, right? So they were already now instead of it just being sort of anonymous, now they were emotionally connected to the actual data that was a part of it.
I love it.
So
And you even said here, try to put yourself in the position of these pieces. You're asking them to drop themselves in the moment and really think about what they're doing there and try to position themselves in that. So let's move forward. We'll go next. I'm going to get through the slides so we can get chatting. So this is how it began for everybody in this audience. Day one, this begins. Our dispatchers receive a call that a single application at Fake Financial, which actually was a real financial firm, right? At Fake Financial, a small investment firm, Fake realized their system's not working. A tech is scheduled to look at it remotely. All of you that are listening that are in MSP, these are the steps you would normally take. Client contact calls back to say, wait a minute, my desktops aren't working and this note's popping up, right? Upon digging in, your technician is presented with a ransomware note. So we're doing a role-playing game, right? So let's go to next day, next piece. And then we ask the people at the table to sit down and talk about it. What are you going to do for client one? And I'd ask you as you think through this and listen to this right now, what do you do for client one? What do you as your organization already do when a client calls in and says, I have a material incident happening. I have ransomware. I've discovered it quickly. I have something going on, or business email compromise or other flavors there, right? And so we ask people to talk amongst themselves. Bob, anything stand out from talking amongst yourselves with your team versus when you did it with people that weren't your teammates? What was much more valuable or less valuable there?
Well, that was a whole different conversation. You know what I mean? When it's anonymous game data, you don't really wind up talking about. It's harder to put yourself in the position of knowing them and being, and having empathy toward them, right? But when it's your actual customers, and you know those people on a first name basis, then you get that empathetic response right off the bat, right? Which changes the dynamic completely, right? It really does.
I got to think
So,
too.
Cam?
You got people at the table here, right? Someone might have an idea about what the first step is. Someone has an idea what the other first step is.
Yeah, right.
Within a minute, you're already having an aha moment saying, we don't have a first step.
Yeah, Cam, that's exactly
especially
right.
in one team.
That was the other thing I did, right? I was really pretty brutal about mixing this up. So I should tell you about the audience mix, right? Because this was an operations offsite, and it included right about half our organization, most of which was operations, but I also had finance and also had sales. I had HR in it, and I had marketing in it, and I had a diverse crowd in there. And I was pretty brutal about making a mix up on the tables. I didn't let them clan up with one another with the people.
Yeah. It had to be new experiences, right?
Yeah. So I said, no, that's not going to work. You're going to have to get out of your comfort zone, and you're going to have to work with people that you don't work with. So I was brutal about moving people around. And to start the deal, for the very reason you just talked about, Cam, is because I wanted a diversity of perspective, so that when they started having these conversations, it was going to be from different viewpoints, which was going to enhance the experience for everyone, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
100%. I do love the comments in here from Positive Energy. Surgeon sounds a lot like a lead technician. You're not far from the truth on that statement. He was making a comment back to the arrogance, I would imagine, was the aspect I tease. I've been in that position, so I can point at myself if I need to. So let's go back. I just want to take everybody through kind of the setup and what we were doing here, and then we'll get a little more detailed on it. So next slide, please, for me. So after we get done talking, we then let the crowd know in our role-playing game at the table that now you've received calls from multiple clients, right, claiming the same thing. And desktops have ransomware and servers are inaccessible. Your phones are starting to be constantly busy, right? Like, think about it. If you have X number of lines, if you're in a SIP trunk methodology, or if you're, only have old POTS lines, or if you're using, maybe other methodologies, not a big of a deal. But ultimately, the number of people that can answer the calls isn't equal. You have 28 clients. Each of those clients have multiple personalities and personas that are all consuming from various places. Multiple people each reach out every way they can. Like, they start texting you, they start emailing you, they start Facebooking you, they start finding all those technicians' numbers they had stored. They start texting those technicians. They start saying, hey, you're getting this. You're needing, hey, my stuff's down. I need to be up. Oh my gosh, you're killing me, right? Your voicemail keeps piling up and clients are calling technicians directly, right? Like, you're walking them through this escalation. It's everybody. Everybody's down. Right? And it becomes evident very quickly. So next, please. And then we ask them to talk about it. What do you do? So we put in this heightened state of awareness and kind of fear, right? And I don't know if anybody's out there getting goosebumps, but I do, right? I remember those days. I remember I try not to tear up, like people saying, I hate you. I wish I'd never met you. Your company destroyed me. Why are you taking me down? I can't feed my family. I'm going to have to fire my employees. I'm having to let people go. And I don't want to take this down, but this walks people through the emotion of at least trying to empathize with what happens when that happens, when everybody's down and you don't have the resource to respond to it. So, Bob, any standouts here from the conversation with your team? I haven't had a chance to ask you that or debrief on it, but how did it start there? Did it just descend into chaos, or?
Well, I mean, this was clearly the all hell is broken loose sort of moment, right? When, okay, now we know the flames are looking to seal, and what's going to be the mission to try and get this, where do we start kind of a thing, right? But I'll tell you a couple of little observations that were really interesting, because we'd done projects earlier the previous year to make sure that our technicians were not one-to-one with our customers. In other words, we were making it to where different technicians work with all customers for this. Wasn't for necessarily this reason. We weren't foreshadowing this, but I knew it was a better operational mode to be in and more efficient, so that you weren't singled up on any one technician. Yeah. So when this came out, and in the exercise it says, well, they're calling people's cell phones directly, all of our technicians started looking at each other and said, well, I'm glad we fixed that last year.
Yeah.
Because they were saying, man, this would be a mess if we didn't have that new system in place. This would be killer. We'd be smoked. So little things like 100%. That. And we've experienced outages on main internet egress and things before that are small in stature compared to something like this, but it had all the phones ringing. So it was real easy for them to put themselves in the place of saying,
that's cool.
And this would be brutal. You know what I mean? So all that was happening.
That's cool. And that's the reason for tabletops. Go ahead, Cam.
Yeah. So, first client goes down, that stinks, right? Next thing you know, you got 3, 4, 5 clients, your clients are going down, multiple clients texting you. The common denominator, right? Now you start looking at yourself. That's a whole other bag of worms.
Yeah. Yeah, it's horrifying.
There's nowhere else to look.
Right.
It's
now
me.
your team is now your team's looking inward saying,
Yeah. It's
bring them out of this. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that it may not be your fault, but it's still your problem. Until you find out whether it's your fault or not, you don't know. But it's still your problem. You still got to field the ball.
That's what Robert Chiaffi says, right? Like in his case, this was something that was not him that caused it. It was caused by a vulnerability in a common software that everybody used, and yet just the amount of pain that comes from that you feel and feel from empathizing with your customers who are literally questioning whether they're going to have a business. And I live in this firsthand. I'm part of ERT with CompTIA, or the emergency response team with CompTIA. And right now, there's people that have been through this in our world. I can tell you that firsthand, and they're living with it. And some of them have said, "Hey, I actually financed my company, and I'm still paying it off, and I don't know that I can even make that happen." Think about that pain and what you're dealing with. I mean, so yeah, 100%, right? But to your point, Bob, that you brought up of people making those realizations, the intention of tabletops, period. It doesn't have to be this tabletop. I want you just to walk through this so you think of tabletops, people out in the audience. But any tabletop exercise is to make aha moments and to codify those, and to, for God's sakes, hopefully you change something because of those, right? And I think that's the point. If you have aha moments and go, man, our phones are going to blow up and they have all of our cell phone numbers, find a way to change it. Deal with that. Come up with an operational solution. Write it down as part of things to deal with. So, all right, I'll get off my soapbox before I fall and break my neck here. But let's continue on the next slide and walk us through the journey we took them through in this. So we then give a lot of data about education. And this is something I want you to incorporate in your tabletops as well, which is, you're there to talk about stuff and learn it, but you also know they probably didn't read it. So educate people. Take those things that are part of your policy and bring them into the fold. Talk about things that drive them to some understanding. All of these bullet points walk people as MSPs through the fact, if I was going to TLDR this, you can't just jump in and start restoring machines. Hey there, guy or gal. You have to wait for whether it be forensics or legal approval or validation that we actually have containment, or that we know necessarily that they don't have a foothold and they're going to come back in 2 days. I've actually witnessed that in the last 6 months, where someone thought they were clear and the thing blew right back up on them 2 months after they cleared it out, right? And so we have to start learning those pieces. So when you're doing a tabletop, an element needs to educate some of those things. And so we walked them through the detection phase. If you go to the next slide, we start them walking them through containment and respond. Right. And this was brought up earlier when we talked about IR earlier in incident response. We actually heard them say they were in contain phase. Can anybody want to talk real quickly about what is containment phase different than response and moving forward actively, Bob, from your studies and experience?
Well, detect clearly as you're trying to figure out what's going on, right? So that's the early part of the investigation. And then once you make a determination, you do know what's going on and where it started and who's affected.
At least enough.
Well, as much as you technically can at the moment, right? Then you start this containment process, which is to start isolating any of these particular assets that that you feel like are a part of this event, right?
Exactly.
So containment is all about, and you may have to make some really terrible decisions, right? You may have to basically shut your networking completely, all the way down to, well, maybe I only have to take one machine offline. I mean, the spectrum is really broad about the types of tactical issues you may have to. But the bottom line is, you're going to try and contain. You're going to try to contain and put a firewall around the affected systems. That's what that's about. And then respond clearly is that once you have that in containment, then you can start eating this elephant from the other end, right? And start trying to take these pieces one at a time.
Respond and recover.
Remediate these. Remediate the issues. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can move on to eradication, recovery, right? You can start removing it. Yes, I think you said it well, Bob. It's putting a corral around it. Right, it's stopping those from moving further from this and doing more damage. And you've seen this a lot recently. MGM, most of MGM being down, at least according to them, not necessarily Alpha V afterwards, but according to them, was really containment efforts. They were taking down stuff to try to, not knowing where they were, that they could at least contain and then bring them up in a coordinated fashion. And you're seeing the same thing play out with this mortgage deal today. And I want to bring that up because we give an unhealthy expectation of IRs being this instant thing. The longer you're down, the more. No, sometimes it's out of your control. Sometimes you are waiting for the next step action before you can move forward. You may not have the capabilities of restoring in a contained world and actually operating from maybe an out-of-band place or something to that effect. And so anyways, but we walk them through that you're now in, and we don't make them learn technically each of these components because this is hearts and minds. So we walk the group through. Guess what? You get a counsel assigned. That's your breach counsel. You get assigned somebody as panel for your forensic side. Maybe let's call it, coal fire. You get somebody, or coal fire's, spear tip, let's say. And coal fire is doing some kind of negotiation on ransomware, and some of these actually aren't doing this anymore. Lewis Brisbane's your attorney. How do I know? Those were all of mine. Those are the ones that got assigned to me and that I got to wait for while customers were calling and angry and telling me they needed operations, that we needed to move forward. And I was waiting on shipping disks and ransom notes and things over to the forensics team to make a decision on where'd this come from? How do we move forward? What do we do to close this out? How do I know I'm even going to let them come back up if I bring them back up? Right? And so anyways, we walk them through that event. And I assume you had some stops and some banter through this, Bob. But let's go to the next slide because that's where the game starts, right? So then we explained this, and you modified this from mine. Mine were chips and didn't have as many colors. You kind of gave some more visual elements to it, and actually gave out the pieces. So everybody's now sitting at a table with little chess pieces, right, of colored nature, depending on what they are. Whether they're black, it would be technical resources; blue or temporary technical resources; restored clients, or the white poker chips; red, right. And so you did all that. So we tell people what the pieces mean, and then we move on to the next slide real quick. So this explains kind of the game and what we're doing. The finance and HR person gets the Excel sheet with client revenues and cannot share it. The service manager and lead tech are using the client restore sheets one per person, which means they're splitting that up because you might have different people directing the fight. The CEO and the owner are going to be given the black pieces and they get to distribute. Where are these techs going to go to restore this? And I want to say, what are we doing TLDR? What we're doing in this is, and if I was explaining this game to people, is you have this many technicians that can go and restore and wipe and reload machines. You've determined in this scenario that you must wipe and reload every machine and servers must all be restored. Now, you can't just reload machines if you don't have Active Directory to bind to or if you don't have the things that you need to actually be able to use the data. So you must start with the servers. And so what we really want to suss out is you don't have enough resources to put one of your 10 technicians at all 28 places doing those functions. Now we know we're making some rounded edges. It's a scenario. You're allowed to do that. Make it something so you can force them through it from what you want to achieve, even if it isn't the exact scenario that you can simulate, right? I would take that as an action. So
it doesn't make it any less valid, by the way. The fact that it's not exactly your universe doesn't matter. You're going to still deal with these problems. You're going to have finite resources. You're going to have to allocate them quickly. You're going to have to move quickly. You're going to have to make some really hard decisions in the middle of this process. Those are all valid exercises regardless of your particular environment. So it matters.
Yeah, 100%. So we walked them through it, and I won't beleaguer it. Let's go ahead to the next slide real quick. We probably won't hit each of them. We walked them through how to play. Next slide for me, please. We then send them down. Come on, keep going for me one more. We're going to go to day 2. It begins, essentially day 3. And so we give them morning briefings. This is where I want to see it. So you're ready to get clients back online, right? You're finally able to go forward. We're whatever number of days or hours into this.
Right.
Facing overtime, you have to make a choice. Do you want to give overtime or not? And we make them make a choice. And if they choose overtime, Johnny, spoiler alert right now, it could have negative consequences, right? But ultimately, we are making them make a choice of, do you want to have extra chips so you can get faster at restoring? And this is something that we actually faced. And in fact, had I not done overtime and some of the choices that were made, not just by myself, we would probably have had much more money in our bank and been dealt with differently. So we're trying to teach through this, right? And so we're going to walk them through that. Then the day goes on from a morning briefing to a placement round. If we'll go next slide for me, please. That placement round asks them to actually place their assets, and then we give an injection order first. Client 14 server restoration failed, right? This is afterwards, right? So once they've assigned their resources in the first slide, we now come to an injection. And we tell them, hey, guess what? Your server failed. You'll have to go back to an earlier date. Why? Nobody ever out there, right, Bob? You've never seen a failed backup or a failed restoration for a certain point in time on physical infrastructure. Okay. Yeah. And so we're trying to simulate some of that failure. Yeah.
I even added a little randomness, right, where you rolled a 1d6 and it would be, well, it's a 1 to 3 day delay or 6. You got to go back.
Nice.
How big a delay you receive is, was a little bit of luck more involved. So it made the different tables have different experiences. So that was fun.
Which is fun, and we'll get into some of that if we don't run out of time. We're like really digging into it too much. I want to make sure we have time for y'all and care about y'all's time here. So,
what's the thought process around placing these pieces? How are you? Were you leaving it up to yourself? Were you leaving it up to the team?
Cam, no, yeah, that's the right question, Cam. So each team, even though we were one MSP, each team was playing as an independent MSP. So I allowed them to figure out who was going, because there's a CEO and a CFO at every table, right? And so I allowed them to make decisions about how they were going to go about it. I didn't give them any guidance whatsoever. I did not tell them, and this is a hint, a forward-shattering hint. I didn't even tell them what the scoring rubric was going to be. They made assumptions about it, what it was going to be based on just the information they'd be given up to that time. And you'll see a little bit more about that as Matt and we go down the line. So
that's awesome. And adding to your question, Cam, like I've played this now about 7 times, and I've seen all sorts of strategies. Like some people are like, we're going to focus on the hospitals first and the medical first because we care about human life, and that's a tactic. You've seen people take a tactic of, I'm going to put 12 technicians on this one client, and as soon as it's done, that client's going to be like a SWAT team, and they're going to go next, 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 next. You've seen people assign minimal resources to some of the highest value clients. You've seen them try to tackle the smallest client. I won't give away which strategy in this game wins from a game theory perspective, because I do have some thoughts as to which one seems to always win. But there's been different tactics. And what's interesting is Bob did try to tackle those types of things, and we'll get into it here in just a minute. Let's go to the next slide real quick. Yeah. So day injection, each day has an injection, and then each day has some form of a tabletop exercise to say something about that, right? And so it's educative of, why did it fail, right? Like I had a dedicated FTE, and her whole job was literally managing all clients' backups in every capacitance, and her job was that, and she still failed. She was a full FTE managing that, and we still had failures. It's just life. But can we fix it? Can we get better at it? Can we find it faster? Can we implement systems that help us understand that better? So we force people to talk through those things, right? And if you're building one of these at home, or even using this deck, which I'll gladly share, you can actually inject the things that mean something to your organization, and maybe specifically to your tech and to your operations if you wanted to intermingle that. Right. So next we go to another day. I think we kind of round out a debrief at the end of each day and say, okay, client 1 and 14 didn't finish, right? Now we ask people to score. So they're now saying, okay, did I restore anything? They wouldn't have restored anything by day 3, right? It was day 3 or 4 or 5 before you can even score, if I remember correctly. And when a client's completed, let us know so we can actually tell you that the revenue's been saved. So you've given some inklings, to your point, Bob, of maybe how you're scoring this is the most revenue saved, right? And I'd ask anybody in chat, can you think of a better way to score this other than revenue saved? Are there other things that should be attributes that should be in Bob's thing? And maybe he's already got them in there. We'll see. So add in on chat if you don't mind. All right. Next, let's go to the next slide. So we now take our audience through this kind of repetitive stage until we get to an outcome of the game of saying, all right, what revenue did you save? How many white chips on those companies have you restored based on this time period? Now, we run it usually completely restored. And we run it, like 2 weeks, Bob? Is that essentially what we did in this one? Did you guys do 14 days?
No, yeah, we did the full 15-day run, which took about 4 hours. Yes. That's absolutely right.
And through this 4 hours, everybody's very invested in their little MSP at this point, aren't they? Right? They're all very,
Oh, boy,
very
they
invested
are,
in
man.
saving it. Yeah, I've gotten in
They're trying
drop
to,
down
they're trying to
arguments
take each
about
other down.
yeah, exactly. But you got them all bought in. They're trying to do it. Let's go look at your scoring system, or maybe no. Cam, what do you think? You could do a little guessing into what kind of scoring would be your answer to my question out to the audience. Like what's important in the way you might score that for an MSP in this game or in real life? I don't care which.
Yeah, I think you tipped a little bit off there, but certainly, dollars revenue saved, what's the MRR of these customers? I got to think there's some value in what's an easy restoration, what's something that you can knock out and keep moving on, or something that you can return to. So, with the containment aspect, what can you contain and then return to? But I'm big on weightings, so I'll put a lot of the weight into revenue. I'll say complexity, of the restorations got to get factored in. How many servers are we talking about, and
Sure.
how many workstations, and then I'll put in the customer relationship years there as well, because I certainly saw that. So maybe someone's brother-in-law works somewhere, and now they get a little bit of a higher score, so we'll go to that site.
You might be a little too close to the nose there, isn't he, Bob? Let's jump into the next
Well,
slide if we can.
I would expect him to derive that from that last slide for sure, right? So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so
I use context
revenue
clues.
retention.
That's my specialty.
Yeah.
Right.
See, and I believe that and appreciates that about you, Cam Goldman. Yeah, I think we have revenue retention. The way you scored it, Bob, was you came up with multiple scoring systems, right? How did you do this? Explain this to me a little bit.
Well, I again, because of the complexity of reality, right? I mean, it's easy to save. It's easy to say, okay, well, just how many companies did we restore and was the revenue? And that's by far weighted when you were talking about, Cam, something need to be having some weight to it. Honestly, your day-to-day operations depend on you having revenue. So yeah, it should be weighted.
True story.
That should be weighted. But for the sake of simplicity and getting that down to a simple system, that was part of what the exercise was about as well, right? But it is weighted. You'll notice that the revenue selection, you can get up to 4 points in that particular section. But these last two sections are things that I've added to, again, make this a little more real, and to also change the outcomes in some cases, because you can get a 2 or 1 or a 2 in revenue replacement, but get 3 on social media impact. What I mean by social media impact, what physical number of customers did you save? Because I can promise you, the ones you didn't save are going to be net detractors on social media and everywhere else, right? So
True story.
that has a bearing. It has a bearing and a consideration, right? And then the long-term business stability always has to do with your relationships. So years of familiarity with those customers has a bearing on your decision making. It does, whether anybody wants to admit that or not. It's a fact. When you're trying to decide between A and B's been with you 20 years, and you're a really great friend of theirs, and you've known them, and you've gone to their kids' bar mitzvahs and everything else, right? That matters. And it doesn't matter, because human beings make these decisions. So what I tried to do by doing this, the relationship and business stability, and then social media impact along with the revenue, was to make it a little more realistic, but to also kind of just let people feel the burn on that, right? Because when we got to this page, nobody knew what the scoring rubric was. And so when they saw this and saw that, well, to Matt's point, when they use that tactic of just trying to do 1 or 2 really big customers, and knock out the revenue, they didn't win, right? They were not going to be the ones that won, because they weren't looking at a balanced approach. They didn't consider these other 2 issues. And in reality, the people who did win were not the biggest revenue savers, but they had a really balanced approach. It saved a high number of customers physically, and also the most relationship years. And I would argue that that's probably going to be the MSP that's going to survive the longest, or recover the quickest. So this was really to try and make an improvement and increase the diversity of it.
I think something you learned here too is, you're not making a lot of great decisions or right decisions. You're making a lot of less worse decisions.
Sophie's choices. Yeah, unfortunately.
I call it which ones suck less. You're making the decisions that suck less. That's really what you're coming down, because they're all bad.
And I think it's that's the purpose of this. I wanted people in this exercise, in this particular one, to walk out realizing that sometimes it is a matter of losing gracefully, Sometimes it is a matter of managing expectations and how you want to move forward. And throughout it, sprinkled in things like, hey, have a comms plan, have the ability to decide who's in charge, have structure on how you're going to move forward. All of those things that are iterative and part of that process. And Bob, that's why I love what you did with it going forward. And we just have a couple minutes left, so I don't want to rob this conversation. What else did you do with it, Bob? I think you blew my mind. Okay. It took your developer 9 months to do this, as I understand it, right? If I remember, 9 months. I just want to set that time frame.
Well, 9 months minus about 8 months and 28 days. It took us a couple days to do it.
So what'd you do with it?
Well, we took Matt's game and we actually made it a digital version online playable. So that's what we did. We're old role players and gamers from way back, and we built these game playing frameworks years ago. And when we were going through this, one of the guys that's with me, who's the other software architect, because I'm a software, he said, I bet I could make that a real functioning game in 2 days. I said, well, if you could do it in 2 days, I bet if we get on the horn with Matt and them and show them, we're gonna blow their mind. He says, well, let's just see what happens. And that's exactly what we did.
Mind blown.
So we created an online version of it.
Cool.
Yeah. So that we did that. And so, there'll be more coming on that as we kind of go forward on this. But Matt, one thing I wanted to say before we run out of time, when we're a mature MSP, we had an IR plan, we'd rehearsed our IR plan. But I want to tell you, when we went through this game, we came up with a dozen things that needed to be modified with IR plan, even though we've had one for years and have reviewed it twice a year for years. We still came up with a dozen things that need to be modified in our own IR plan. So this is relevant to a brand new MSP or one that's been around forever. You are going to learn something from this process. I absolutely.
You don't just step on the day of game day and play football as an NFL team. You practice, you watch film, you do all these things. This is your practice day as an MSP, and you should dedicate time to it. I love that. We're running out of time here, so I'm going to kick it over to my co-host, Dom/Cam, and close it out. But I do want to leave with one thing, which is you cannot get tabletops wrong. You cannot screw it up. You will learn lessons, right? You'll go through these things and realize that there are things you should do better. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Go out and start doing a tabletop. If you want to start with this one, reach out to me. I will gladly share it with you from PAX 8. If you want me to come lead one, please reach out. I'd be glad to probably do that as well, should time be permitting. And Bob, also, we're going to hold you to showing us that game and us maybe tackling that in a separate conversation to actually play it together and walk through your version of the Oregon Trail vis-a-vis incident response tabletop exercises. So
awesome. Looking forward to it.
I'll leave it with that. Thank you for being here, Bob. I appreciate it. Cam, if you don't mind,
joy.
go ahead and close us out, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Bob. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today as we here on the game talk about the game created by Matt and Ethan. Thanks again to our guest, Bob Miller. I had a great time filling in for Dom. He's going to be back next week, so don't hold your breath. He'll be right back. And join us every Friday, 2 p.m., YouTube. Take care, all.